And this book that, is really focused on, I'm speaking to prospective and current board members, and I'm thinking, what can they do in this role, right? And this framework that I offer is based on 4 principles. One, it's knowledge, understanding, skills, and strategy. Knowledge and understanding is a much more personal, like, who are you in relationship to the community? What is your positionality in this role, right? And really understanding the community that you're serving, taking the time to like make those connections and know what's going on in terms of issues of inequity within your community, because it is so contextual. Yes, there's similarities across the country, but when we're talking about district level, it is very, demographics are shifting in districts across the country. And so really getting a handle on who your community is, what they want, what they need, and understanding kind of the broader issues, right? And knowing who you're working with on the board, knowing your superintendent and building that relationship. And then there's these skills and strategies. So part of the skills is being able to leverage state and federal policy making and policymakers. And I found that in my work, that was huge. I mean, state policies really drove what was going on in many ways at the district level, but board members had a lot of power in being able to kind of either leverage or push back or resist some of that if they did that together. And as well, the federal policy, there's, at this point with the U.S. Department of Education and Office of Civil Rights, there's ways to kind of leverage those to push equity forward. Even if like you're the one board member, sometimes there's only 1 or 2 board members who are really committed to equity, right? And so you don't have the votes maybe to push that through at your board level, but you can leverage in other ways, and you can pull in. And this is where that strategy piece comes in, is building, coalitions, one within your district, but within your community. So pulling in community advocates when needed to help you push certain issues that are really important when it comes to equity. And in the book, I call that coalition politics. And I get into like why that's really difficult work. I mean, we're not talking about, kumbaya moments. We're talking about, really messy sometimes, relationships, but they're really necessary when it comes to this work around equity and justice. And then being proactively responsive. So it's not if issues are going to arise, if inequities are going to arise, it's when, because it always happens. Like there's going to, if we live in a community, in a society where injustice is just ingrained in many of our systems, and sadly in our schools. And so when these things arise, are you proactive, or are you going to be responsive? Are you ready for it? And that's the proactive piece. And are you ready to respond to it? And that means listening, being able to shift when needed. And then the last part of the strategies that I guess I'm most excited about is this idea of imagining possibilities. And in my book, I quote from Robin Kelly's book, Freedom Dreams. And in his book, he says, "Love and imagination may be the most revolutionary impulses available to us, and yet we have failed to understand their political importance and respect them as powerful social forces." And in this part, and just in general, I really want school boards to center their work on love and imagination, right? And thinking about how can we dream, how can we cultivate the dreams of our communities. This is just so critically important. I think many of our schools are constrained by structures and systems, including high stakes testing, school letter grades, curriculum companies, the so-called science of reading or science of learning. And we really don't make enough space to dream outside of these. But I think that boards can and must take the time to do this work and to think about what should our schools be like for our babies? How do we breathe life into our classrooms? How do we humanize spaces and create healthy schools for our communities? And I say this again, not just as a researcher of school boards, but really as a parent who wants that for her children. I want to see schools that are healthy, that I don't really care about their letter grade. What I care about, yes, that they're learning, that they love reading. Can we measure that? Their love of reading. Can we measure their feelings of safety and value in our classrooms? And so being able to kind of push, and I think school boards, they're not superintendents. They don't have to do the day-to-day stuff, but they are kind of the outside perspective. and they can push districts to move beyond some of these constraints. And they can leverage states to allow districts to do that. And so I think there's a lot of possibilities there. And so I'm hoping that this book and this work inspires, and guides them and motivates them to do this work, because it's not easy. It's a much of a, in many ways, a voluntary position for many of them. And so, it's a lot of hours. And so these folks, I applaud their service in our communities. And I hope that as they do that work, they really kind of keep their eye on the prize. And this isn't a book to say, stay in your lane. I mean, that's what a lot of boards are trained to do often. Stay in your lane. Don't mess with the superintendent, don't micromanage. And yes, I do think there's a place for that. But I also, sometimes you got to do what John Lewis says, is get in good trouble, right? And, if they're really representing our communities and they're identifying what's going on, like sometimes they got to get in good trouble and push our districts to do better.
I can appreciate that. First of all, I can appreciate your positivity, because you sound hopeful, right? You sound hopeful.
Yes, I try. I'm trying to be hopeful. I'm trying to stay, allow that to kind of ground me in my work and not fearful. So
yeah. Because so I love to be able to end on a positive note. You sound hopeful, and I can appreciate that. One of the things within your strategies that really stuck out to me was the importance of building a coalition, because at the end of the day, I mean, there are coalitions that are prepared, ready, got talking points, letters, they got all kind of stuff on a national level that are working against a lot of policies, such as your book bans, such as your critical race theory stuff. Like those are already in place. So it makes a lot of sense to counteract a lot of that by building those coalitions. So here's a question I have, and I'm assuming it's in the book, but if I feel like I'm the one person, like it's just, I'm the only parent that's about that life, like what do you suggest? Like just jump on a Facebook group and create something? Like how do we build those kind of coalitions?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I've felt like that before in some of this work, and that's where, I guess my own experience and the work of, the research I've done and seen other people do it, connecting to organizations that are doing good work in your community, organizations that align, you might not align perfectly with, but essentially, like the bigger picture stuff, right? Are they supporting, for instance, public schools and issues of equity? And so I think every community, especially now, organizations have emerged out of thin air lately, really trying to figure out how to do this work together. It is collective and it is individual work in the sense of there's still, as that one parent, you have a lot of power that maybe your teachers don't have, or a district leader who, like folks who need that paycheck don't have. And so you can also make good trouble in some ways, and just also supporting teachers. I know as a parent, I'm very explicit with the teachers of my kids. Hey, I want you to integrate culturally relevant curriculum for my kids. I want you to have diverse books for them to read. That as a parent, that's really important to me. And I also think that they need to hear that, because maybe they're hearing the other side of that, where folks are saying, no, don't put anything. And I want to make sure that that's not the only narrative that's being told. And that's not the only narrative they're hearing. And so I know I can say things that maybe other folks can't. And I can also try to either at least add to the narrative and hopefully shift the narrative so that our voices, different voices, are heard in the full kind of discussion around all of these issues that are really politically contentious.